Hello, everybody. I hope you're well and happy wherever you are, and that if you've been ill, that you're much better and that you've hit the ground running. Here I am. My name's Georgia Byng, and I'm here to read you another chapter of Molly Moon's incredible book of hypnotism. Today, I've got a picture by somebody called Bangardini, a South American painter. It's pretty cool because when you look at it, I find when you look at it, it moves and you look at different bits of it and it seems to change as you're looking at it. So it's quite hypnotic, really. There's the book there, and I'm going to read you chapter 7. The next day was a Saturday. Molly was woken from a deep sleep by Petula jumping on her bed. When Molly looked down, Petula dropped a stone on the floor as a present. She seemed much chirpier. Molly pulled her up and scrunched her ears. "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Petula. You've really helped me, you know." Molly tapped Petula's chest with her paw as if to say, "No, you're the one who's helped me." So they were friends. Molly swung her legs out of the bed and went to the window. Over the slated rooftops, she could just make out the church clock. The other children were already out on the Saturday morning walk. Miss Addison liked to drive the children in the minibus to the bottom of a hill called St. Bartholomew's Hump, 10 miles away. Dropping them there, she'd expect them to walk up the hump and back over the hilly countryside to the orphanage. This gave Miss Addison 3.5 hours to herself, which she always spent in town. Molly knew she always went to the foot doctor to have her corns clipped and her bunions seen to, and then perhaps somewhere for a couple of glasses of sherry, which meant that Molly had roughly 3 hours until everyone returned. Wasting no time, she put on her dressing gown and left the room. It was lovely to be able to slide down the banister with no one around. Petula bounded after her, rushing into Miss Addison's apartment through her dog flap and out again with her lead in her mouth. She followed Molly, down to the ground floor. Molly walked through the hall, then skidded across the polished floor of the assembly room and quickly and quietly entered the dining room. Down to the kitchens they went, down the slope, past the cutlery drawers and the plate racks. Edna could be heard clanking metal saucepans as she started to prepare lunch. Molly walked stealthily on, in her head turning over the lessons she had learnt from Chapter 3, Hypnotizing Others, and Chapter 4, Pendulum Hypnosis. In the attic room, Molly had already made an imaginary journey into Edna's head. There she'd found a disgruntled person, full of resentment, bored by life and tired of working. Molly thought she knew how to hypnotize Edna. It shouldn't be too difficult. After all, grunting Edna was very like an animal. She took a deep breath as a wave of nervousness flickered through her. If it all went wrong, Edna would just think she was strange. Molly walked into the old-fashioned kitchen with its cracked white tile walls, its broken sinks, its 2 gas ovens and its flagstone floor. Petula followed. Edna was taking chicken heads out of a bag and putting them into a huge saucepan of boiling water. Hello, Edna," Molly said. "That smells nice." Edna jumped and then shot Molly a dirty look. "You're bleeding creepy, you are, creeping about like that," she said. Edna obviously wasn't in that freakish good mood of the other night. Molly tried again. "What's that you're making?" "Bloody soup, of course," grunted Edna, pulling a feather off one of the chicken heads. For once, Edna's language was correct. The soup really was bloody, with all the chicken heads in it. "Yum," said Molly, her stomach turning. "A Navy recipe?" "'Spect you've come for something to blasted eat. Better not be bleeding infectious." "You look bleeding uncomfortable," said Molly suddenly. Course I look bleeding uncomfortable, Edna retorted. I am bleeding uncomfortable. This kitchen's too hot. She pulled at her white overall and flapped her arms, reminding Molly of a big, fat turkey. Why don't you sit down? Suggested Molly. I'll stir the blasted soup and you can make yourself comfortable. Come on, Edna. You bleeding deserve it. Edna looked suspiciously at Molly. Something in Molly's words made her feel at ease. If you sit down, you'll feel more comfortable, Molly coaxed. And, lazy as Edna was, she agreed. Yeah, can't see why not. After all, you've been in the blasted bed for 2 days while I've been slaving away down here. She sat down in the kitchen armchair, her legs splayed out like a doll. I bet that feels more comfortable, Molly said, taking the spoon from Edna. You must be bleeding exhausted. Edna nodded. I am. Phew. She leaned back and exhaled noisily. You're doing the right thing, said Molly, looking at Edna calmly. Taking deep breaths like that. Deep breaths will make you feel more relaxed. Suppose you're right, agreed Edna, puffing out a grumbly breath. Molly's voice slowed subtly. If you take a few breaths, you'll see how relaxed you feel and how much you needed to sit down. Yes, said Edna. I did blooming well need to sit down. Then she opened her eyes. Hang on a minute. You're bleeding infectious. I shouldn't be letting you near that food. This was annoying. Molly realised that maybe hypnotising Edna wasn't going to be such a breeze. Maybe she should have brought some sort of pendulum with her to focus Edna's mind. It's all right. The boiling of the bloody soup will kill any germs, said Molly. And in an inspired move, she began to stir the soup slowly and rhythmically. The wooden spoon circled the rhythm of her words. Edna watched the spoon. Don't you think, said Molly, the boiling soup will kill the germs? Nothing to worry about. Molly concentrated hard as she spoke and stirred. Edna seemed about to say something, but her eyes were overcome by the movement of the stirring spoon, and her laziness got the better of her. I suppose you're bleeding right, she sighed, and sat back again. I expect your shoulders and back are feeling much more comfortable, said Molly. Agreed Edna. They are. Then she said, Molly, you've got very big eyes, you know. Thank you, said Molly, turning her green eyes on Edna's. Your eyes probably feel very heavy now. You see how much you needed to relax. Edna's eyes started to flutter as she looked at Molly's eyes and watched Molly stir. And this room is so warm and comfortable. If you just sit there and I'll stir the soup round, round and round. Molly stirred, trying not to look at the simmering chicken heads bobbing about in the pot. Round and round, I'll stir, and Edna, you should just relax and relax even more. Perhaps you should shut your eyes. Edna did not shut her eyes, but she did look very distant and dreamy. Inside, Molly was so excited that she wanted to shout, Yes, I've nearly done it! But instead she said calmly, I will count backwards from 20, and you will feel more and more and more relaxed. And as I count backwards, Molly stirred and really concentrated on her most soothing voice. 20, 19, Edna's frown disappeared. 18, 17, Edna's eyelids hovered. 16, 15, 14, 13, At 13, Edna's eyelids suddenly clamped shut, and all at once the fizzy, fuzzy, tingling feeling started to creep up Molly's body. "The fusion feeling," Molly gasped. Then, noticing that this made Edna's eyes flutter again, she counted more. 11, 10, 9. "Now, Edna, you are so deeply relaxed that you are in a trance. 8, so relaxed. 7, deeply relaxed." Molly stopped, stirring the soup, and walked over to Edna. 6, she said, only a foot from her. 5. "And as I count down now, you, Edna, will be more and more in a trance until when I get to 0, you will be completely willing to do as I say. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. "Good," said Molly, as she looked at Edna sitting quietly in the armchair. She'd done it. She could hardly believe it. The low, steady voice that had given her the name Drono was obviously the perfect voice for hypnotism. Perhaps her eyes had something to do with it too. They felt as if they were glowing. For a moment, Molly was lost for words. She'd been concentrating so hard on how to hypnotize Edna that she hadn't thought about what to tell her to do. So she said the first thing that came into her mind. "From now on, Edna, you will be really, really, really nice to me, Molly Moon. You will defend me if anyone tells me off or punishes me or bullies me." That was definitely a good start. "And when I come into the kitchen, you will let me make tomato ketchup sandwiches. You will buy me delicious things to eat from the town because you like me so much, and you will stop making cheese and nut sauce fish. In fact, you will refuse to make fish any more unless it's fresh that day. And," Molly hesitated, then added recklessly, "and you will become very interested in Italian cookery books. Italian cooking. You will get Italian cookery books and try your hardest to become the best Italian chef in the world. And you will cook lovely Italian food from now on, except for Miss Addiston, who you will give her normal food to, but make it much, much spicier. Also, without knowing it, you will make Hazel Hackersley's food very spicy too. And Gordon Boyle's and Roger Fibbins. Is that clear?" Edna nodded robotically. It was a wonderful sight. Molly wanted to laugh, but then her stomach gave a loud rumble and she said firmly, "And now, Edna, you will drive me to town and buy me a proper breakfast, and you will remain under my command." Edna nodded and stood up, and with her eyes still closed, walked straight into the door. "But obviously, Edna," said Molly quickly, "you have to open your eyes to walk and to drive." Edna opened her eyes and nodded. Her expression was distant and glazed, just as Petula's had been. "Okay, Edna, let's go." So Edna, dressed in a white overall, a chef's hat, and white clogs, walked out of the building like a zombie. On the way, Molly picked up a coat to cover her pyjamas, and outside Petula picked up a piece of gravel to suck. Driving with Edna wasn't a good experience at the best of times. When she stamped down on the accelerator, making the back wheels of her Mini kick up gravel, Molly put on her safety belt. Edna was not altogether there, it seemed. On the way down to Briarsville, she drove with a very peculiar expression on her face, as if someone had just dropped an ice cube down her dress. She drove down the main road in zigzaggy jerks, nearly hitting an oncoming truck. Then she shot 2 red lights and drove through a flower bed in a pedestrian-only park. Finally, she stopped the car on the pavement outside a cafe, and staring blankly ahead of her, she led Petula and Molly inside. From the door, Molly worriedly checked the street, very relieved to see that no policeman had stopped them or spotted them. Inside the cafe, 2 builders looked up from their bacon sandwiches and studied Edna. In her white outfit, she looked odd anyway. On top of this, she was moving like a clockwork doll. Quickly, Molly encouraged Edna to sit down. "Can I help?" asked a chirpy waiter who had a carnation in his buttonhole. Yes, please," said Molly, since Edna was staring straight ahead at the salt cellar with a surprised look on her face and was beginning to dribble. I'll have 4 tomato ketchup sandwiches, not too much butter, and a glass of orange squash concentrate with no water added." Molly's mouth watered. It was lovely to be able to order her favourite things. The waiter looked bemused. "Shall I bring some water for you to mix with it?" No thanks," said Molly, "but a bowl of water for our dog would be great." Petula sat at her feet, loyally, cocking her head to one side as Edna blew a raspberry. And for the lady?" asked the waiter. "I love bleeding Italy," said Edna, sucking a fork. "It's nice to be out of the hospital for the day, isn't it?" Molly said to Edna kindly, as if she was on an outing from a loony bin. The waiter smiled sympathetically. 20 minutes later, after the most embarrassing breakfast of Molly's life, they were driving back to the orphanage, past the town shops, past Shoot It, the camera shop, past a bicycle shop called Spokes, past the antique shop with its curly painted name, Mouldy Old Gold. Molly thought of things she'd always wanted, and she felt on top of the world. Miss Addiston probably had mountains of orphanage money stacked up in her bank account. All Molly had to do was hypnotize Miss Addison into taking her shopping. Molly looked across at Edna, who was smiling like an idiot with her wide mouth wide open. She was completely under Molly's spell. Would everyone be as easy to hypnotize as Edna? So far, Molly seemed to be a natural. "Edna," said Molly, "when we get back, you will walk down to the kitchen, and as soon as you pass the door, you will wake up. You will forget about our trip. You will not know that I hypnotized you. You will tell Miss Addiston that I came downstairs for a headache pill and that you still think I'm very ill. Do you understand?" Edna nodded. "And from now on, whenever you hear me clap once, you will go into a trance again. And during that, you will always do as I say. And whenever I clap twice, you will come out of that trance. Is that clear? Not remembering anything that happened. Do you understand?" Edna nodded again, her mouth hanging open like a puppet, then slamming her foot down hard on the accelerator and her hand on the horn, she urged the car up the hill. Professor Nachman was woken from a frenzied sleep full of pendulums and swirling motifs by a car screeching and beeping loudly in the street outside his room in the Briarsville Hotel. He rubbed his eyes and ran his tongue along his plaque-covered teeth. It's nicer than here. It's nicer than Chicago here," he grumbled to himself as he untangled the scorpion medallion from the mesh on his string vest and reached for a glass of water. After his frustrating experience at the library, the professor had extended his stay in Briarsville. He decided that if he badgered the pathetic librarian often enough, she'd find the hypnotism book, or he hoped he might find somebody reading it. Briarsville was a small enough town. Since Thursday, he'd been prowling its streets, stalking people, carrying books. Mothers with small children had crossed the road to avoid him, and one group of teenagers had called him a weirdo. But he didn't care. He was determined to get hold of Dr. Logan's book. He had particular reasons of his own for needing the secrets contained in it, and they had nothing to do with museum research. Professor Nachman knew a great deal about the life of the famous hypnotist. He had read how Logan had grown up in Briarsville and travelled to America, where he became rich and famous with his hypnotism show. Nachman had studied yellowing old press cuttings describing the amazing feats of hypnotism performed by the doctor in the show that had made him one of the greatest celebrities of his time. He had visited Hypnos Hall, the palatial mansion that Logan had built with money from his career as a showman. But he had become especially fascinated when he learnt about a book that Dr. Logan had written, which it seemed contained everything he knew about hypnotism and how to do it. Very few copies of this book had been printed, and it was extremely rare. But Professor Nachman had discovered one of the only surviving copies of it was owned by the library in Briarsville. From that moment, he'd been absolutely determined to acquire that book for himself. He'd almost got it too, until that stupid librarian had lost it. Thinking of that librarian now made Nachman quake with rage. He imagined throttling her skinny neck, and the blood rushed to his head. Puce in the face, he reached for the phone. "Room service," he said angrily. "Bring me a pot of librarian. I mean coffee." He was desperate for that book. He had never wanted anything as much. Nothing in his dishonest life had been quite as attractive, and he had big plans that depended on him finding it. Nobody was going to stop him having it, and he wouldn't return to the States until he had that book safely in his fat, oily hands. And that is the end of chapter 7. That was quite a long one, wasn't it? So, yes, have a good rest of the day or a good sleep or whatever you're doing next, a good morning. Be happy, be well, be kind, and try to laugh as much as you can. And happy hypnotizing. Bye.